Hey guys, so we're gonna begin in a bit. Hey, Ashisha.
Yeah. Hi. So Paul, are you the host today?
I don't know. Oh yeah, I am. Yeah.
Because I cannot make breakout rooms. Can you actually make me the host? Because then you would be giving the demo, and I would have to
Okay.
make breakout rooms. So, okay, thank you. Awesome. So I'm sharing my screen, and then we'll start. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Cool. Should I just start? Or should we wait for some people?
It's so minimal today. I guess maybe just 1 minute.
Yeah.
You can hear me, right? Like I'm using a
I
really
can hear
weird.
you.
Okay.
I hope people know about the change in the link to the coding lab.
I know there were people on the chat in GroupMe that were saying that it wasn't working. And so someone explained to them that the link changed. So probably not everyone knows, is what I would imagine.
Yeah. I just got a question on Piazza as well about this. So I pointed them in the right direction.
Nice, okay.
Okay, I guess we can start then.
Okay.
Okay. So who all are there? Welcome to your Coding Lab 5. The flow of it is going to be the same. We're going to cover some FAQs. There are very few this time. The Coding Lab 5 is due tonight at 11:59 p.m. A3 is due on the 4th and at 11:59 p.m. Exam 1 grades will be released on Monday or Tuesday, not sure. Then Paul is going to give you a coding demo about functions, conditionals, errors, and debuggings, which is going to help you with your assignment as well as lab. So let's look at some of the FAQs. Okay, so these are some questions on Piazza, which I thought would be important for you all. The first question was, is value the same thing as element? So when we say the element of a list or the value of the list, yes, they're the same thing. We mean the same. Also, the second question is a very important question for any of you starting the assignment 3. So whenever you install a new package using pip, right now you will be installing NLTK. So when you do this, after installation, you need to restart your kernel and only then make use of the library. Because if you try to make use of the library before restarting, it's going to throw an error, which kind of confuses you. So make sure you restart your kernel. Okay. One of the generic questions I found was, how do I make my functions print? So if you have a function and you want to test out what it's actually returning, how do you make it print out? So you define a function using def, my function, and whatever, write whatever you like, write whatever you want to execute inside the function. If you want to test this, you would say output is equals to my function input. The input is the input parameter. So this output will now have whatever your function returns. And then you can just print this output. So when you print this output, this is actually testing the function or printing out what the function is returning. So these are pretty much the FAQs for today. What you can do if you have questions is type in your questions. And if you have personal questions, I can create breakout rooms for you as well. Paul, you can take over now.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, let's see. Okay. All right, guys. So it's good that we're finally halfway through the quarter. Just wanted to talk about more about functions. I think Ashlisha gave an intro last week. Sorry I couldn't attend. But essentially, we covered a lot about nested conditionals and loops, and what Python kind of does is you just technically create and nest those on a function, and you can do that a lot. So you have nested conditionals, nested loops, and then what's really great is later on I'm also going to talk about debugging. So what you're going to get is a way to really effectively code is not just attack it the way you would like, but know what to avoid. So those are some of the errors I think was covered in class. And then we'll just reiterate those and then provide ways of resolving them. So let's start with this, functions, conditionals, loops, and combinations. Some of the things that were covered were docstrings. I think docstrings are very useful. In fact, they really do the same thing as what comments do, but in a way, they provide more of a functionality for if you want to query a function, what it does, the inputs and outputs. You can definitely use docstrings. How you would do this is you can, after you define the function, underneath the next line over, you just put in 3 apostrophes and then whatever text you have. And then the next thing, or another thing that you can do is triple quotation marks. So I'll show that in a bit. And then why you would do this, we talked about this before, but in a way, you can use docstrings to document your functions. So that other programmers or debuggers can really follow the logic that you're doing. And then in the same sense, name your functions, where when you go back to it, a year or 2 years down the road, you'll know what you did. And yeah, so how you would pull that up, if you did define the docstring, is you would have your name of your function, and then you put a question mark, or this is another way you can do it. I'll show both of these, but you could use help and then your function without the parentheses. And then we'll also cover default values for functions. So what this is we briefly covered it in a lecture, but when you have a function, you defined it. And for example, you had 2 arguments, and then you only define 1 argument. And then the second argument, you kind of omitted. You could define a catch all for that, in a sense, like when you don't define the second argument, which I'll show, it'll default to that value. And then we'll also cover about arguments for functions. There's 2. There's the positional argument and then keyword argument. And then these are just positional arguments. Essentially, is just the order matters. How you define or how you input the arguments inside a function. But then for a keyword, this is just very explicit. So the order doesn't matter because you defined it directly on the argument, and then that's going to be used within your function. And there's also a few methods, so there's methods. We covered this a lot, actually, I think in week 3, the demo, coincidentally, but what these are is, these are just like, if you had like a function or a list, you put in or a string, you put in dot and then capitalize or like lower or upper. And for this, there's a really great way to, like, for example, you don't know what these are. You can just type in that list variable, and then type in dot and then tab, and then you'll see a list of these methods. They'll show up that you can choose from. So now let's begin. So for the first one here, so defining a function with docstrings. So as I mentioned, so you define this random function, and then what you would do is you would just do this. This is just one way I would put in like a documentation. There's many ways you could do it, but I put in inputs, you know, what argument these are, and then what does it return, so like the output. And then so one good way I do is what kind of data types do these inputs and outputs take, so that you don't make a mistake later on. And then so it gives you to find this, right? And then so you want to know how would you access this if this was like in the background and you didn't see this. A way you could do that is, so you have your function name, and then you put in a question mark. I didn't find this yet. So here, so you did that, and then you would see this, and pretty much your doc string is right here. And so another way would be if you were to use help. So this help function is the same thing. It just shows you your function here that you define, and then helps, you know, verbiage. And then so the next one here is so the default values. What are they? So for example, you define this function. It's greet, and then you have these two arguments here. So this first one is just a name of the person, whatever. And the second argument takes in like here's the output actually. So you would greet the person, and then you would tell them another, like how do you do. But what if you didn't define that? So for example, right here. So you say hello Kate, but then you didn't define a second argument. So it defaults to this. How you define that is like, so for whatever input argument you have here, you would just put in an assignment. So you would define it, and then whatever you define there is what's going to output here, if you didn't define any second argument. For this one, hello Bruce. So you technically defined your message. So this overwrites that, or just this doesn't default. You just have that. Okay, and then so the next one here is positional arguments. So what this does is so it doesn't really explicitly say like what are your arguments here. So the order really matters. So for example, this function, it does the subtraction of the number 1 and then number 2, as shown here. So if you were to just define this and then use this function and then put in like 2 for number 1, and then 1 for number 2, and you would think, yeah, so it will be 1, right? So you have 1. But then what if you switch them? So you switch them, now the order matters. It's going to be a different number. You get -1 here. And so that right there, the order matters. But then now what about for keyword arguments? So keyword arguments is the order doesn't matter. And the reason why it doesn't matter is because now you're defining these. So here, let me just define this. So you're defining the actual, like what you're assigning the argument here, like number 2 to whatever number you really want, and then number 1 to like 2. So this one would be what you had here, but then you can switch it. Doesn't matter, the order doesn't matter. You're gonna get 1. Okay. So here, this is also another thing. For method, methods are just a way to, I guess, like a function that manipulates a variable. So how I said you could do that is you could put in the variable and then dot and then whatever function you have here. For example, if we talked about this, like if you had upper, like what you have here is you would take this string that you define, and then you'll just make them all uppercase. And just going back to this, so what this does, dot find, is so you define the string, right? And then this string, you're trying to find this t right here. And then what this does is it gives you the index of where that t is inside this string. And then this gives you the range from 5 to 20. So as you remember, you count from 0 to like whatever number. And then so you get 15 here. I'm not going to count it, but that's the position of this t here. And so here's another one. This is using a method with dictionaries and loops. So you define this dictionary. And then what if you wanted to do a method of keys? So you get this, the dictionary that you define. And what I'm trying to do here is, for each one of these, I'm taking the counter and then having num1, num2, and 3. So this is just accessing the keys. So that's what it does. And then they're putting it in the counter, and then you're going to print all of them. And then another method is, what if you wanted to access the keys, or no, the values? So you would just do dot value. So you have all these values. Now it's not the keys, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you're doing that same thing here. So it's just a way to manipulate your lists or your variables with these methods. And then so there was some questions on these. So functions can also be used with loops and then conditionals. So that's what we're going to talk about in a bit. So so what if you had this, I was thinking, what would be a good example for this? One of those would be like a factorial. I think everyone knows what that is. So like, what if you define a factorial function? So doing a factorial, you would think you probably do a loop, because then you have a sequence of numbers up to like that number, and then you would multiply them. So that's what I did here. I had it as 1 first. And then whatever you would think, like you define a loop, a for loop, you just put that inside your function. And then the one thing is, like, what are the one thing you want to know about functions is, what are the arguments that you should put in here? So at first you would think like, oh, there's gonna be so many, but if you break it down, you'll think like, oh, you'll just need the number, because that's what you need, right? Like, you want to get the factorial of 2. So you input the 2, which is the number, and then what do you want to get out of it? Your output is the factorial of it. So you use this function, and then so you define that, right? And then let's test it out. So the factorial of 2, that'll be like 2 times 1. So you'll get 2. So yeah, it's just, I would just think of it as like, the hardest part probably is what goes inside. It's just pretty much a cover. This function is just a cover of making whatever you have in here local, and then so that it makes it clean. And you don't have to, you can't modify what's in here. You're just gonna access, like, this is what you're gonna see. It's like, oh, okay, I want a factorial, so you're just gonna see this function. And everything here is like not seen from a user. And then another example of this is, I think a lot of people know this too. So in factorials, you multiply them, right? So what if you ask, like, what if I just wanted to add them? There is a sequence for that. I think it's called Fibonacci. So just for, if you don't know what that is, it's just this list. And then what I'm gonna try to do is I'm gonna add these numbers. But then I don't wanna do it where I'm just doing like that manually, or I'm just doing it using conditionals. I wanna just put all of them in like a function. So I would create the conditionals first, and then logically how you would do it is just doing this. And I mean, the first thing here is just gives the first number, second number. The details doesn't really matter, but the after you use this function, you put this inside your you define the function, and then in the end, what your arguments are is just the number, and then this number is the the position of your sequence. Same with the factorial, the number that you want to get to that point that you want to multiply, or whatever you want to minus, or you want to add. So in this case, we want to add them. So doing this Fibonacci of 1, you get 0, and then what if you wanted to do, just and then this is just showing what it's doing. So it's 0 plus 1. So that's what that is. You could do 2 of these using functions. And here's another example for conditionals only with functions. And I think one great example for this is like, and everyone knows, is BMI. Is like, like body mass index. I think how would you formulate that? And what I did here is like, oh, there's maybe you can get the name of the person, and then their height, and then their weight in metric. And then just good practice is that, so you would do this doc string again, and then the first thing I do here is like, there's many ways you could do this, but just the equation of like what your function does is like, you would define it here, knowing what your arguments were. And then here's the bulk of it. So the bulk of it is, now you have all these local variables here, and then how would I get the so you did define your body mass index already, but then what this is doing is just, how can I present the information more effectively, like knowing what the BMI is. So this is what I'm doing here. And then here's just an example. So here's the 3 different people, different heights and weights. And then, so where I'm using that function is here. So I'm just printing out what the result of the using the function would be. So yeah, that's what you do. You use this conditional. You use what you got in the beginning, and then you can just print it out. And then you know this already, but when you do this function, this is what you're returning. Your return is your output, and then what you have this for your return here is technically assigned to your function here. So that's why I'm just printing this. This is one line. And then another great way you could apply this is like both of them, conditionals and loops, is what if you had a game, like a coin toss game? Everyone's familiar with a coin toss. So, and what's good about that is it's easy. Like you have 50% heads and 50% tails. So you can do a conditional for that, like whatever your result is. This one is just so that you do like a random toss. So this is what I'm doing here. So you put all of that here, and then you want to know, and if you're 50%, you get 0, and then if you're less than 50% of the time, it's 0, which is going to be tails, and then I'm doing 1 for heads. So this is going to result in 0 and 1. I could have done it where it's T or H, whatever you like. And this is just a way for me to use a loop. Like if you want to use a loop to use your function, you use the function that you define. So you would do that here. This is where I'm using that function within a loop. So the result of it, heads or tails, in here. And just to explain briefly what I'm doing here is, so I'm starting a coin toss game, and then so you use this coin toss to get heads or tails, but then you want to create a game now where you have, you want to count how many heads you have and how many tails. But then you want to create that list first. We covered this last time, but you create empty lists and then you just populate them. So this first loop, knowing you have these, the coin toss results, you put them inside this empty list. And then these other 2 lists, you would just use this. So you had like a loop and a conditional combo, and then this just goes. This just judges what you have in your array of coin toss, and then this is the result of it. You can probably take this further. Like maybe one way would be So now you have heads and then you have tails, and then what do you get from it? So, you guys can take it farther. Okay, so that was the first part. Now let's talk about errors and debugging now. One of the ways that really helped me understand the different errors, and because like when you find out what an error is, you're probably wondering like, oh, what is that? Like it seems so like, indentation error. What does that mean? One of the ways that really explains it is in the Python documentation. You guys can look it up here. You can just like type this in Google Python document. You'll get to this same link. You'll find it. But in there, you'll find like definitions of these, and then sometimes you'll find an example. You probably have to look for those, like how you encounter them, how to solve them. But instead of like telling you, I'll just show you guys what they are. So here's the first one, syntax error. And what that is this is just one way this problem is encountered, is what if you had a missing colon? This is very common too though. And then what if you had like a missing parentheses? And how would we resolve those? Well, for example, this guy, I'm gonna run it, and it says here syntax error, invalid. So this is typical. And then what happens here is like it shows you where did you get that error, which is nice. Even tells you what line. So this one, it shows you like it's after 4. So what I would do here is like to resolve it is you just add the colon, and then so that's it. That's how you resolve that. And then what if you had like an if condition too? I mean the same thing. Here you're missing the colon, so you would add it, and then you don't have that error anymore. And then you're missing a parentheses. This one happens a lot. So you're missing a parentheses, tells you where it is. So you go there and then you just add it. You're gonna see this in your lab. And then the next one is indentation error. What this is what if you had in some codes you don't have to indent your commands. In Python, you very much have to do it. So that's how we keep on telling you guys to to align your commands. One way I remind myself is I'll just align it with the conditions, either loops or for conditionals. Just align it. But sometimes actually when you're writing your code, if the color is red, that's when you know there's something wrong. So just indent it to a portion where it's not red anymore. So, and then so how would you resolve that? Just align it or indent it. So for example, I did mention this before. Like, yes, this indentation may be an error, but at the same time, what if you want to debug your code? Like, what if you want to know, like you're manipulating a list, and then you wanted to know every portion, and then there's a loop in there, and you want to know what outputs every time it iterates. We showed that last time. So sometimes it helps you if you're intentionally wanting to not indent. So, but in this case, it doesn't. So here it's in line with your command. So just indent it. So as you see, it's red, right? So indent it until it's not red anymore. And then this next one is zero division error. And this really, yeah, it's self-explanatory. It just tells you zero division. So you would encounter this by dividing either by this division operator. In this case, how you would resolve it is just, I guess, don't do it. And then here would be a modulo. And then so it's not really resolving it, just avoid doing it. And then the next one is name error. So what a name error is you would encounter this by a missing definition or like an assignment of variables. And then usually you didn't define a variable and then you just used it right off the bat. So you're gonna get this error. Showing you how that happens is here is a, so for example, you have this 5. I'm just deleting this because I defined that before. So what if you did like 4 plus, and then you had 5 here times 3, right? You just you don't even have this variable defined yet, and then you went on and then ran it. So you're gonna get this name error. It shows you what line, and then it kind of tells you what it is. The string here is not defined, or the variable here is not defined. So you would go, and how you resolve it is you would define it, and then if you're doing like, that's why the logic of it matters. Like, so you're adding things there, right? You're operating mathematically here. So you need to define something that will make that work. So you define that variable as like an integer or float. And then another one would be if you're doing like a list. So if you're doing a list, and then within that list is a list of like numbers, but then now you have this 2 like out of nowhere, and then so you'll get the same thing. So it doesn't have to be a number here, but you just have to define it. So now so that's how you resolve it. And then the next error would be an index error. This is just so, for example, if you remember, we were talking about slices. Like if you had like lists, collections, and then you want to slice them by index. And then, but if you remember before, when we define it, like what we have here, and then what if you were slicing it, and then you went like out of bounds, like you were trying to index something that's longer than this list. So you're out of range, and that's what that means really. And so that's why what really helped me was maybe know what the length of it is. And so you know the length, and then because of that 0, then you -1, that will be the end. Or if you don't want to know, if you don't want to do that, you can just do like the end of it. This is just some, but there's other ways where you can encounter this error and resolve it. And then this next error is key error. A key error is so you probably guess what it's associated with. It's associated with dictionaries. So we had an index error with other collections, but then with this key error, this is more associated with dictionaries. So how you encounter this is maybe something like this. So you define a dictionary, and then you printed something that's not within the dictionary. You don't have the keys or the values, and you're indexing that. So you're gonna get a key error. And how you would resolve that is I guess there's this .get, which is a method that you could use. A method that you could use to append. It's in a way, it's a way to add to it, but this one is telling me that when you assign this .get, you want to put in this default value. So if you run this, you have this ln in this list of dictionaries, but then your default value is this. So that's one way, and then this one is you didn't define anything, but this is a non-type. So, but at least you didn't really you don't have your error. So that's one way to avoid it. And then now, what about a value error? What this is you're trying to create an integer out of a string, or referencing a variable from an empty list. So what that is when you see it is, what if you were trying to make this string into like an integer? It's a string, so you're passing it to this command, so it's going to give you a value error because this is a string, not an integer, or it can't become an integer. But if you put in 5, So that works. So just to really know what your data types are. And then with a list, maybe if you had, what I have here? Oh yeah, this. Oh, that's a name error. Here we go. So what if you had like an empty list? And you're trying to remove list var from it. And then so list var, you don't really define what that is, and it's not in the list. So since it's not in the list and you didn't, actually, hold up. Here you go. So you define list var, but then your list is empty, and then you're trying to remove it from here. So this is one way you could actually encounter this, because your list is empty and doesn't have that variable that you're trying to remove. So one way you could do that is add it first to your list by appending, and then or define it with that variable, and then use remove or something else that could manipulate that list. And then this next one is type error. So this type error is operating together with two incompatible data types, or if you had like indexing non-collections or operating on a tuple. So okay, I guess so that first one. So if they're not of the same data types, like you had an integer here and then you have a string, this is one way you can encounter it. So you could resolve that by just knowing that these two are integers and then just add it. This way you could do it. There's a way to make it work. So for example, you want to add this 2 plus, but then this is a string. So since it's a string, make it into an integer. Then now they're both integers. So you could do that to resolve that. You've seen this, and then concatenation. So what if you wanted to concatenate two things? So that's one way you could do it, like knowing that you're defining it like directly. And if you want to make it into a string, like an integer, is you could use this. Now they're both strings. So that's one way to resolve it. And then what if you're working with collections? And for example, so you have this list var, all right? We defined 5, but then it's a number, it's not a list, and then you're trying to index it. So you're gonna get a type error because it's a number. This is kind of like an attribute error. We didn't really cover that, but you're doing like you're attributing or using a command like a slice on a number, not a list. So that's why you're getting this type error. And then, so one way you could resolve that is so know what a slice does, and so define only use that slice on like on a collection. So there's no error. And then this next one is so if you remember with tuples, we have them in parentheses, and then so here you're gonna get a type error because but then you're not gonna get it if you're gonna use a list. So if you see here, so this is a tuple, and then if you have a list, you can directly just add that like an append. But then if you're using a tuple, you cannot. You're gonna get an error. So in a way, just know what you can and cannot do with a tuple or like a list, and that's the one way you could avoid it. So with all of that, this is partially probably not gonna cover the other one, but I'm gonna end with try and accept. So we talked about how you can resolve like errors using different techniques, but one nice one is a catch-all solution. In a way, it's what it is so you have this try, which is I'll just show you. So we have try, and then that modulo that's going to give you a division error. So it does this, but then you're gonna get an error. So what you put is you want to catch that error by doing this. So you put in, what the error may be if you're, and then instead of getting that error, you're gonna output this. So I'll show that it applies to everything. So that's what happens here. I'll just briefly cover this because you're gonna see this. Datetime methods. So this is just a way to query calendar components. I think you're gonna see how you would use this ISO weekday just to show you what it is. So you have this query day of the week. What you should do first, I think this is given, but you should import this date time. And what ends up happening is what you're trying to do here is like, what day of the week is it? And then so this is today. This is just a test. So you assign it to this variable. You do this function date, and then you want to know, and the day of the week is associated with a number, where Monday is 1 and then Sunday is 7. So when you act on this variable with ISO weekday, it's gonna output 3, which is Wednesday. And so that's how you do that. And then the next one is finding the latest and earliest dates. So you do the same thing. You import this module, and if you don't know what something does, you could always do direct. So for example, here, so there's our directory. So you have this date time, and then it tells you what the things that you could do with it. And then so now what you want to do is maybe the latest date that you can put in is you just do .min, because as you can see, you could use that. You could always check the directory if you can't use, or what you can use. And if you want to use the maximum is this guy. So just know what date is, the arguments, the mins and max for a year, which is the first one is 1 to 999, and then for the second one is month 1 to 12, and then the third argument is day 1 to 31. And then so this next one, this is probably the more complicated the task, but what you're gonna do is, what if you want to query the number of days in a given year and month? So like, for example, like this year and then this month, and I want to know how many Sundays, Mondays, whatever day are in a month within this. So I mean, here's the way argument. You just define each one of those. Thinking logically, what you need is you need the year, month, and day, and then you initialize them. And in this case, you're trying to count the number of days. So one way you could do that is with a while loop. And then so you do a while loop, and then if you think about it, so while you're increasing the number of days, you want to only know or count when once it's a Sunday. So knowing it's a Sunday, that's 7. So you would do a conditional, and then that's why you would initialize another counter. So this counter is gonna go up, and this is what you're gonna return. You're gonna output this because this is only gonna go up in value once you reach this day, And then this is just me looking at like, okay, I'm gonna print something. I don't want to print numbers. I want to print a string. So that's it. You're gonna get, the number of days, and then within a number of Sundays, in this case within April 2020, is 4. And yeah, that's it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Hey, Mark. You said you had a problem.
Yeah, I keep on having an error that says string index is out of range, even though I defined the counter as the length of my input.
Okay. Do you want to just like briefly show what you have?
You
Yeah.
can
This is
share
for,
your screen, yeah.
okay, yeah. You want to share your screen, Ashley? So,
Because we are just 3 of us right now, so.
yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So I'm having, the error is going right here. And I think it's about thing with counter. I think it has something to do with up here.
Index error.
Okay, so did you consider that the indexing starts from 0 and then the length will be length of thing, which is apple, so 1 2 3 4 5. So the counter will be 5, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the indexing actually starts from 0, so you could only have thing of 4.
4, yeah.
Okay, and your condition is counter is greater than 0, so it'll only go till 1.
It'll only go to 1?
Uh-huh. Because when it reaches 0, it doesn't go inside the loop.
Can you explain that one more time?
Okay, yeah. So for debugging this, I think you should print out counters every time. And also print out inside the loop, try printing out counter once and see what happens. See what the counter is. Print out thing of counter above this. Like the first thing you should be doing is that inside the loop. Yeah.
Print. Counter.
And also print out counter.
Okay.
So one tip, print out counter before you print out thing of counter, because that's where you're erroring out. So you want to see what counter is.
Yeah.
Sorry, my audio was cutting in and out.
Oh, no, it's okay. Move this print statement, print counter, above this print of thing of counter, so that we see what counter is before we try to see what thing of counter is, because that's what's bugging out.
Yeah, that's where your error is. Yeah.
So
Above this,
up here?
Yes. And then let's see what happens. Okay, so
The
the counter now is 5, right?
Yes.
It starts from 5 because the length of thing is 5. The length of apple is 5. So when you do thing of counter, that is thing of 5, there's nothing at thing of 5.
Which doesn't exist.
Yeah, doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yes.
-1. Yeah. Actually, yeah, we had this one, the -1. There.
There you go.
Okay.
So now you can just remove those print statements if that's causing confusion. Yeah.
Okay. So growing string of counter. So while counter is, should it be while counter is greater than or equal to, or just greater than?
Your wait. What's your growing string? I mean, what is that variable?
I just set the variable because of up here. So growing string is just add
Add the letter at index.
the letter into the empty string. But because counter, it's only counting all keys.
So that thing, that growing string, they did not mean like a variable. That's not a variable. So what you want to do is reverse the string right here, right? So you go from back. You want to keep appending it to output, correct?
Yeah.
That was your motivation behind this line.
Yes. Yeah.
So instead of writing growing string, that's just you creating another variable.
Yeah. Just says output.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah, Nick. Are you in the 5 o'clock one? Yeah, we'll go over it.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
There it is.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Yep.
Paul?
Yeah.
Are you gonna go over this debugging part?
I can go over it. It's like I was looking into that.
We can actually, if Nicholas, if you want to share your screen and ask us particular questions, we can answer that.
Yeah,
or
we
if
can
you
do that
like
too.
on a generic view, Paul can go over it in the section.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
because I was gonna do a demo, which is really exactly what it is.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, I just got stuck on the second part here. I kind of got lost, to be honest. So I don't have a specific question.
Okay.
Okay.
I fixed some syntax errors, some indentation errors, and then when I tried the second function or the second cell,
Yeah.
this code here. So I tried to add a continue. Well, basically, I tried to add a continue so that if the input for one was if the input for input 1 index 0 was 0, it just skip past it and not run that code. But I got this code, and so I don't know how to work past it. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Can you scroll up?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm not even looking at this code completely, but just looking at the error that's popping up. It says that you are calling answer or referencing answer even before you're initializing it. Like this print answer is taking place even if none of these if or else ifs are taking place.
Okay.
So what we can do is maybe have a answer variable above all these if else's so that we always know that it's always defined.
So put answer here.
Yeah, just like initialize it to any number. I don't know, -1, 0, whatever. Some number that's not part of the if else's.
Okay.
Okay. So now that this will avoid that error at least.
It just says it's not properly in the loop, so it's just indented improperly then.
No, that was intended correctly if you wanted to do it inside the if.
Because it's telling me that
Not
properly in the loop.
Oh, there's this answer after your if. Make sure that's intended correctly.
Sorry, which one is this?
Just after your if, the place where you have your cursor right now, just below that line.
Oh, right here?
Yeah,
Oh,
below that. Yeah. Yeah. Did you run it?
Yeah.
Okay,
Still.
that's the same thing again. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm almost thinking it's like, you know how like you have this continue, because like We kind of went over
Oh,
this, but,
wait. I know what happened.
what happened?
So, you can't have continue if it's not a loop.
Okay.
Oh, yes. It's a condition though.
Yes.
So how do I guess my question is, how would I type code so that if the
Right. Now let's see, what are you trying to do here? What is this function trying to do?
basically I'm getting a divide by zero error when I run this function as is for this cell. So what I don't want to do is if input 1 index 0 is equal to 0, which it is here,
Uh-huh.
or here, then I don't want that to run this code here, because then it's going to return a divided by 0 error. So
You could do like a try and accept maybe. Like,
is that good?
we're gonna go over it, but like, did you guys go over in class try and accept?
I don't think they went over exception handling yet.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I could go over it now, but it's almost time. But what you could do is, like, how you divide by zero, right? You can try what you have, and then once you have the divide by zero, just catch it, and then whatever that is, so that you don't get this error, whatever the divide by zero error is.
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand what you mean by just catch it. So
Yeah. So what that means is, so for example, where are you outputting divide by zero? This answer, right? I think it's
right here. Yeah.
answer.
So this code, I added this code. If I can copy this.
Okay.
So
So what
this
you
is
could,
the original code, and when I ran it, that's fine. That's
okay,
the division error.
there you go. So you're getting it from there. So what you could do is, where you have else if, the first one.
Yeah.
Under that you could put try, like just enter another line, and then try, like okay, and then colon, and then so you have this whole thing, and you're gonna try it, but then what you're gonna get is you're gonna get division by zero, right?
Right.
So after that line, so after this line, the next line after it, put except.
Except or
No,
except.
except, EXCEPT. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. And then
Yeah. So the professor informed us that you guys have not gone over this in class. So
yeah, you haven't yet, right?
you can just attend Paul's section now, and he's going to explain all of this.
Yeah.
Or if you don't want to, you can just try something over here, and you're going to get full credit just to.
Yeah, Nick. Like,
Yeah.
this is part of it, but like, I want you to finish it.
Okay. Thank you. So I can finish it from here. I can just play around.
I think so. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, I guess we can start, or oh my God, there's just 4 people.
Wait, so what happened with what's going on with the link? There's a new thing?
Oh yeah, so there's a new link to the coding lab. It's updated. So you must have accessed it through Canvas, right? When you opened the coding lab?
Yeah.
Yeah, so students would have saved the old link to somewhere in their machines, and they're trying to open the old link. So
I see. They bookmarked it or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
That sucks. I don't know why it's.
Yeah. Should I just start now?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, okay, cool. Okay. So for all of you all there, welcome to your Coding Lab 5. As usual, we're going to go over a few FAQs. They're pretty limited this week. Your CR5 is due tonight, 11:59 p.m. A3 is due on the 4th, Monday at 11:59 p.m. Exam one grades will be released on Monday or Tuesday, not sure yet. And then Paul is going to give you a coding demo on functions, conditionals, errors, debugging. This will help you with your assignment as well as coding lab. Okay, let's look at some of the FAQs that I found on Piazza. Now, one of the questions was, is value as the same thing as element? When we say find the 0th element of the list or find the 0th value of the list, yes, it's the same thing. We mean the same. Also, the second question is kind of important for all of you all starting with your next assignment. When you install the NLTK library or any library for that matter, you need to restart your kernel before you actually make use of the library. If you don't, it's going to pop an error that kind of is confusing. So always remember to restart your kernel if you install something. Okay. One generic question that I found was, how do I make my function print? So if you have a function which you define using def, call it, suppose, for example, my function, and you want to test that function, what the function is returning. So what you can do is say something like output is equals to my function and the input parameter to that function. So what this will do is call the function, and whatever value it returns, it's going to store it in output. Now you can print out this output just doing print output, and that will give you what the function returns for a certain set of parameters. So that's pretty much it for the FAQs. If you guys have any questions, you can just text, and I can create, if you have particular questions about your assignments or coding lab, I can create breakout rooms for you. Paul, you can now take over.
All right, thanks, Alicia. All
Yeah.
right. All right, so this week we'll be covering tips and tricks for functions, more in depth about it. I know Ashisha talked about introduction last week, and there were some questions on how to use functions with conditionals and loops. So we'll cover that today, and other things. We're also going to be covering debugging. I know you guys covered errors in class, but I just found out not a lot on try and excepts. So that's going to become very helpful for catching errors. So with all of this, you know, we've kind of taught you guys different building blocks. You know, you have your nested conditionals and loops, variable definitions, and then you're wondering, how can I implement functions with these? In a way, you could always put it inside a function, and sometimes you wonder, like, why put up with that? And I would say it's more for what if you didn't have access to that? So that, you know, there's this thing about local and global variables. So if you had everything, like, you know, the loops inside and then the conditionals, if you have access to it, then you can modify it very easily. But what a function does is kind of separates that. So everything outside of it is global, and everything inside is local. So you can't modify it. And so let's start with the first one: functions, conditionals, and loops combinations. So you covered this a little bit in class. Docstrings. Docstrings is just a way similar to a comment. What this does is it just provides a query. For example, what if you wanted to know what a function does? What's its inputs? What's its outputs? So you could all put that within a docstring. And how you define that is one of two ways. One way is with a triple quote, and another way is a triple apostrophe. I'll show that in a bit. And then you're wondering probably another reason why you would use functions is this doc string is for documentation. You know, down the road, maybe 10 years down the road, you're trying to you've created this function or this program, and someone else is taking your code and modifying it or debugging it. It's going to be really tough to follow the logic. One thing is you should be using very specific variable names, and another thing, function names. But one thing you could use is comments and doc strings so that your flow logic is very apparent to the user. And so how do you access this doc string? One way you could do that, I'll show you this too, is so you just have your function here, and then you put in a question mark, or you can use a help function while putting your argument as your my function. And then another thing is default values. With functions, where this comes up is, what if you had like a multiple argument function, things that go inside the parentheses, and then you had one that defined it specifically, and then what if you defined it, but the second argument isn't really apparent? That's going to become clear in a bit, but what ends up happening is you can just define with an assignment operator what your default value for the argument is if you don't define it. And then for arguments, there's two. There's this positional argument, and then you have this keyword argument. And in layman's terms, position arguments are just arguments that don't change. It's an argument that the order matters. So the way you input it, which will become clear in a bit, matters. And then for keyword arguments, you have to define this explicitly. And in a way, the order doesn't matter. Where this is very apparent is when you're adding or like when you're multiplying things. And there's also methods of functions. What these are, we covered this in, I think, coding demo number 3, where you can modify strings, integers, whatever your object is. And how you would do that as a syntax is so you have your object or your variable, and then your method is after this, this period. I'll show you guys a few ways that you could do that. So these are some of the specific methods for strings. You could capitalize it, you could make them lowercase or make all of them uppercase. And you're probably wondering, so what if I don't know what these are? Well, what you could do is you could just have that object and then type in that dot and then press tab right after that. I actually didn't show this in the other lab, but I'll show you guys. This is when you have this object and dot, and then what ends up happening is you're going to have this drop-down menu where you can choose from a slew of commands, and then it just does the work for you. Okay, so let's begin. So the first thing is, so how do you define doc strings? So like I said, you have your function, and then within this, you have this triple apostrophe or quotation mark. And then this is just a way that I think simplifies the process is you provide the inputs, you know, everything in this argument inside the parentheses. And then you provide your output, which is like what your function is returning. And then one way I do it, you could provide obviously more verbiage here, but what's very helpful for me is what's the data types of these arguments, and then the returns, so that I know how to use them. And that's technically what this is. And then you'll find out later on as well is once you know what to avoid and whatnot, what to use, it's become, you know, the way you code is going to become more streamlined. And so you define this, and then what if you wanted to access the doc string? One way you could do it is with a question mark and then the function. So that's that. And then another way is with a help command. So you put your function within the argument of your help command. So you have this, and then as you can see here, whatever you define pops up. So it's very helpful for those that are going to use your code. And then the next thing is the default values. So what these are is it's exactly what it may be, is a default value of a function argument. So what, for example, I have this function here, right? And it's greeting someone. And then you put their name, and then you have a message for them. And then so if I don't have this default, well, it's just gonna be your regular function. And what I mean by having this default is you provide this assignment operator, and then if that argument isn't defined, then this is what's gonna pop up. So here, let me show you that. So for example, here you have greet, and then the person's name is Kate, and you output it. We didn't define the second argument, message, so it defaulted to good morning. And then obviously, you could use it. You could always override this. So one way you could do that is just put in your own string there, and it'll output the way you would want. And then the next thing is the types of arguments. So one of those arguments is positional arguments. So like I said, these are really good if you're doing, obviously there's already an operator for subtracting. This is just an example. This can get more complicated, but what we're doing here is we're trying to subtract this number 1 and then number 2, as shown here. So you can do this, right? Associative rule. You could do this one of many ways, but what if you put in like subtract, and then you want to subtract 1 from 2? So you're gonna get 1, right? And but what if you switch those? You're gonna get -1. So that is what a positional argument is. So the order matters, as you can see here. What about keyword arguments? So for this, the order doesn't matter. And how that gets implemented is, so you have a similar function, but now the way I'm actually using it is the arguments has these explicitly defined like variables instead of just assigning it to what this is, because this variable name doesn't really have to be what this is. So that's why it's just taking whatever you had there for the position. But then for the keyword, you're saying that I do want this second argument to be 1, and then the first argument to be 2. So this is what you would get if you were to do this without defining those explicitly. You could do it this way too, but make sure that these are defined. And then so this next one is a couple methods of using methods for strings. So this method is .find. What this does is it operates on a string variable. So you define this string variable, and then what I want to do is I want to find what index this t is here, knowing this range. So you're going to get 50. I'm not going to count it, but you're going to see that there's a t here. Okay. And then what about this method shortcut? Let me just see if I can show you guys what that means. So you have this string variable, and then I don't know what type of methods I can use. So you just have your variable, and then your period, and then tab. And then so once you tab, you're gonna see this. So there's gonna be a slew of items that you can choose from. What I really want is just to make it all uppercase. So you do that, but then don't forget your empty argument. So just put in two close parentheses. So with that, you have them all uppercase. And then the next one is a method that works with dictionaries. So there's 2 types that you could operate on dictionaries. One of them is keys. So with this for loop, what ends up happening is I want to just access this list, like all the keys that are in it, not while omitting the values. So what you can do here is you have this list, and then you have this dot, and then keys. And so what ends up happening is you put all of them one by one in counter, and then that's what I'm doing, I'm printing it out. And then so what if you want to just access the values? You would just do the values, and that's what ends up happening very similarly. And then now here's some examples of how you could use loops, conditionals with functions. And I was thinking that some of the examples maybe are familiar to people, but
hey Paul, sorry to interrupt. Can you actually make me the host so I can create breakouts?
Oh, I totally forgot about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, you are the host.
Are you sure? I don't
Yeah.
know.
That's really weird.
Yeah, I can't see the breakout rooms option on my screen.
Did they move it?
Ah,
Oh, let me see.
okay, okay, got it. They moved it to somewhere else. Anyway,
Okay.
you can continue.
Okay. So for factorials, some of you guys may know what it is. So when you define it, I think there might be a command for it. So what you would do is like, you get this number and then you times it up to that number. So when I try to define these functions, I guess you have to think about the inputs and the outputs, because like the inputs is, when you break it down, goes inside the parentheses, and then you have a return or whatever that the outputs. So in this case, I want a number, and we're gonna try to whatever this number, we're gonna try to multiply up to that number. So this is what the for loop is doing. I'm just trying to create this string, which you're gonna see here. So for example, if you want the factorial of 2, so it's just creating this string and then outputting the output of 2 factorial, which is 2 times 1. And then another way is like, so that one is defining a function that multiplies a sequence of numbers. What if you want to add a sequence of numbers? So there's this very famous sequence called Fibonacci. And what's shown here is just that sequence. So how you could do that is with a conditional. You can just increase the, whatever the number that you have. There's many ways you could do this. And this first 2 gives the first number and the second number. And then, you define this block of code that you guys are familiar with. And then you just nest it with a function. So this is pretty much what it does. Like, as I mentioned, like, you have all these variables within your function that's local. And then what the user just sees is this. You very clean, and then they can't edit what you have here because it's local. And so that's technically the purpose of it. But for you creating the function, what's important is being clear about what you're defining. Like what inputs and outputs do you have and how to use it, and then knowing everything you already know, just put it inside the function. And then, so how can you apply conditionals with functions? I think there's a unique way is to calculate body mass index, or BMI. In this one, I have 3 arguments. I have this name, and then the height, and then the weight. And then I said you have this doc string, right? And then you're telling them the inputs and then the output, which is a number or whatever. And you're gonna see here how I'm defining it is just the equation of BMI. And then, so what's the conditional of this is here, the body of the code is just what I'm trying to output. Like knowing what the BMI is now is, I want to know if someone's healthy or not healthy. So I have this that compares that value, the BMI, and it does a if and else statement. And then so with that, this is just an example of how you would use it. So I have 3 names and heights and weights, and then I would just print out. And then for you, if you're using the code, you're probably just interested in if you're healthy or not healthy. So, but then for the coder, you would want to like debug this, knowing the different ways and the logic of it. And then a really unique application of like combining conditionals and loops is a coin toss. Heads or tails. How can you do that? Well, I would just define the function, whatever a coin toss, and then here I have like I'm inputting this module random. What this does is it just does a random number, and then from that random number, I would assess if it's less than 0.5 or not. And then if you have a 0, then that means it's a tails. And if you have a 1, then that means it's heads. And then, so one way you could use this is maybe you create a coin toss game that has like a for loop and a conditional with it. And then we explained this in previous coding labs, is how to create an empty list and then populating it with things that you want meeting a condition. So this first one is just a way. So as you can see here, like I'm using this function here. So this function technically just gives you zeros and ones. And then what I want to do is I want to put that inside this empty list. And then from that, I want to assess, are they heads or are they tails? So this is what I'm doing here. And I guess you could extend this into, you know, I mean, you can have a betting game, I guess, as you have number of tails and number of heads. So there's so many different ways you can use conditionals, loops, and functions together. So now let's move on to errors and debugging. One of the ways that that really helped me in, like, you know, at first when I saw an error in like Python, when I was first working with it, it really was very complex. Like I didn't understand what it was. I mean, these are some of them, and what I usually do is I would Google it. You could do that, but then there's this Python documentation. If you go to this link, you're gonna find a lot of like pretty much all of them defined, and there's some examples of how to recognize them and how to avoid them. So instead of like telling you guys, I'll just show you what they are. So for example, the first one is a syntax error. So for a syntax error, what this is you can encounter this very commonly if you're missing a colon or if you're missing a parentheses. So here's an example of that. So I'm using a for loop. And then, for example, I don't have a colon, right? So this happens. So what's great about this is you have this line, it tells you like where it occurred, and then you have this arrow. And then so if you look at this, okay, so this syntax error was because of this. This occurred here. And then you're probably wondering, what am I gonna do to debug this now? Well, you can put, that way you just put a colon. And then so it runs. And another one, like I said, this happens a lot with like conditionals and loops and many other things. But here's for a conditional. So again, it shows you the line. And just to show you guys, I guess we've showed this before, but how would you, like, because these lines are very helpful, you would just go to view and then toggle line numbers. In this way, you can know and locate where your errors are. And so same thing, it's after the if statement. And so you put in your colon, and then there you go. It runs your code block. And then here's another one. If you're missing a parentheses. So yeah, you're missing a parentheses, tells you line 11, tells you where, it's after the string. The one thing is it doesn't tell you how to resolve it. So that's why it's very helpful if you go to this documentation or just know it after you made the mistake. So there you go. And then the next one may be the indentation error. So what this does, I always encounter this a lot. Sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. I'll tell you when it's actually good is, for example, what if you had like a for loop, and then in that for loop you're iterating and changing a lot of the lists or whatever you're doing, and then for example like a counter, and then you're changing that counter, and then within the list you don't have you're exceeding the number of the length of your list. It's very helpful to maybe not indent. So if you don't indent, like here, it gives you an error. but in some cases, it will still output what you have. So in that case, that's good. But in this case, since you're getting an error, one way that you can recognize that is the color of your command here. Right? So it's red. So the way I usually resolve this, and so it's just a catch-all for me, is so I don't have to think about it, is after your for loops or after your conditionals, I just align it. Like whatever you define, especially if you have a nested loop, make sure that that command that's associated with that loop is aligned with the conditional. So that in that case, you don't have to think about it. And then here's the other one, zero division error. So sometimes they're confusing, like what is that error? But then this one is not, so because it tells you it's a zero division error. So how you would encounter this is if you were to use a division operator, or if you were to use like a modulo operator. And how you would avoid this is I guess it's not really resolving it, but just avoiding it. So just know that maybe you're not gonna resolve it. And then I'm gonna talk about how you can actually catch this error, is so that you don't get this. And you can use a try and except combo. And then so the next thing is name error. So name error is, so how do you encounter this is one way is you're missing a definition of a variable, or you're missing an assignment of variables. So like, for example, what if you just use like a variable without defining it, like right off the bat? And then, for example, in this case, I'm adding and multiplying 5. But 5 here, maybe, here it's obvious that I didn't define it, but maybe you had like pages and pages of code, and then in there you define a variable that you didn't define. This is gonna pop up. And so this del command here, I'm just deleting it because like I've already defined it here. But if you have this error, just define the variable and then run your command again, or operations, and then you shouldn't get that anymore. And then what if you had a list? The same way, in a list, you could always put different data types, but then make sure you define them first. So for example, this one, I don't have 2 anymore because I deleted it. And then I'm trying to output that here within this list. So I print it, and then the code doesn't know that I have what this 2 is. So again, just define it as a solution. And then once you define it, you should be good to go. The other thing is index error. So if you guys remember, we talked about slicing using indices with collections, especially a list. So this is associated with that. You're missing an index to which you're referencing, a slice, and there's different ways you can account for this. Know what you're trying to index to, not from 1, but from 0. And then know how long your list is with length. And then knowing, the range of your collection, if you're using range. So like how would, an example of that is, so you have this list. And then for this list, I'm trying to index 5. So you're gonna get this out of range because this is only 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you change this to like 4, you're gonna get that. So just knowing like how to count inside a list, and if you don't want to count, you can always just use the length function, and then so that when you're out of bounds. So for this one, you can always access the last part. And this is I guess this is kind of common, because then instead of using this, you can just use -1 instead of this whole thing right here. And then the next one is maybe a key error. So as you can probably tell, this is associated with a dictionary. So how you would encounter this is kind of similar to what you did here, but in a dictionary. So you define a dictionary of keys and values, and then what if you want to access, I guess, ln, which isn't in the, it's not a key, or so you're not going to get the value. So that's why you're going to get this key error, because it's trying to find this key in here, but it's not in there. So what do you do to resolve it is I guess a method can work where, so you have this dictionary and then you're trying to input or append into this dictionary ln. And what I'm doing here is just, so it's just the value associated with ln. So in a sense, you're defining the key and the value, and then you're putting it inside your dictionary collection. So with that, there's no error anymore, and then you are getting a value. And then another way would be, you don't want to access the value, or you don't have a value for it. So at least you're getting something. So even though it's none, because you don't have a value, but then you don't have an error. So, and then the next thing is value error. What this is you're trying to create an integer out of a string, or you're trying to reference a variable from an empty list. So the first one, for example, this guy. So you're trying to create this integer, but then what you're passing it is can't become an integer. It's a string. So that's why it's very important to you know, I mean, that's like the very first thing I think for this class that we talked about was knowing what your data types are, because then once everything gets complicated, you know, it's hard to track. Like for example, this isn't, but like if you're trying to convert this into an integer, but then you're in the noise of your code, you don't know what if dog was a string or if dog was a defined variable. But so in that sense, like, yeah, you're gonna get this value error. But if you knew that that is an integer, and or it has a variable defined, then you can just, there's no error. So you need to know what you're trying to pass inside a command. And then so this one is referencing a variable from an empty list. So your list here is trying to remove from an empty list this list variable, which you define as 5. This can be anything, but in essence here, what you're trying to do is you're trying to remove from an empty list. So you're gonna get this error, value error. What I would do is like sometimes you can check if there's if your list is empty, and you can catch this. But here I'm just showing. Okay, let's add to that list. So you're adding 5 now. It's not empty, and then let's remove it. So this resolves it. And then the next thing is type error. And then so for this, you would get this error if you're doing you know, operating two incompatible data types, or indexing non-collections, or operating on tuples. So that first one, so for example here, you're adding an integer with a string. So that's one way you're going to encounter it. You have a type error, because if you read this, integer and string, can't add them. You've seen this when we were talking about operators. So, you know, so if you can't do that, then you make them both an integer. So you have this. So now it's good. Or another way you could resolve that is, what if, you know, you wanted this string to become a number? So it becomes a number, and then you add it to the number. So it's already, so now they're both integers. And oh, what if you wanted to concatenate instead? So they're both strings. You can explicitly just make them strings like this. Or if you want to convert the integer into a string before you concatenate, then you get this. And then another way is like indexing non-collections, or like something that's not a list, or the others. So for example, maybe you define this list and it's a 5, but it's not a list, it's an integer. And then you're trying to index this number. So that's another way. You know, you're gonna get a type error. And then so how you would resolve that is just know you're trying to do something, which is, I didn't really cover this, but there's another type of error called attribute error. You guys can look that up in the documentation, but what that is if you're trying to access an attribute, or trying to, like for this example, using a slice on like an integer, which an integer you cannot do that, but you could do it for a list. So like this. So now you have this list, you're accessing that number. So there's no error.
Hey Paul, there's a question about value error. Could you go over that once more once you're done with this?
Which one?
Value error. They want to know how value error works once more.
Okay, sorry. So for value error, I guess there's two things. There's more than one, like two, but what I'm trying to cover here is creating an integer out of a string. So this first one, I mean, let's just make it something else. So you're trying to make that into an integer. So inside here, you're trying to make it into an integer. So this doesn't work. But then what if? So now this is a number. Now it works. So that's one way that you can encounter it. Another way is with a list. In my example, I'm referencing an empty list. So for example here, I have this empty list. This list variable is just arbitrary. You don't really, what I'm trying to do here is this can be not a number, but what's important is this is an empty list. So since it's empty and I'm trying to access something inside it, you're gonna get this because there's nothing inside this guy. But then to resolve that, this line right here is just taking what I have and then putting it inside. So now it's inside this. So now it's not empty, and then I'm removing it. So now it's good. You're not gonna get a value error. Okay. All right. So with all of that, those are just some ways that you could resolve or debug errors. One really helpful way, for example, maybe you're trying to catch an error. You don't want to show that you have that error, and so the two commands that you guys would like to do is a try and except command. So these guys is in essence is just a way to not show the error, but then if there is the error, if you do encounter the error, then you're telling the code or the user this happens. So for example, this one, whatever you put in try, and this is the syntax for it, is so you put try and then a colon, you don't want to forget that. And then the next line is whatever you're trying to do that's giving you an error. Remember, what you put in try is whatever you're trying to do that's giving you the error. And then the except is whatever that error is that you're trying to catch, and then the colon, and then inside the next line is, it doesn't have to be a print statement, but like, well, you know, once you encounter this error, this happens. This is what you want to do. In my case, so I'm getting a zero division error from this, and then I want to tell the user you're getting this error, and then check that you're not dividing by 0. So, I mean, as you guys saw, some of the errors, I mean, it's already clear. Sometimes it's not. And then maybe what you want to do is, because when you're running the code, it stops when you get this error. And then, if you do this, it'll output and it'll still run, but then at least you know that you have this. And then I'm not gonna explain all this, but mainly you have these, just telling you have this error, and I guess a helpful way would be check, put in a check or like a warning. And then I think for this, I'll briefly go over it, but it's in your assignment or coding lab. It's a datetime methods. And then what these are just ways to query calendar stuff. So the first one here is, what if I wanted to know the day of the week? Like, is it a Monday? Is it a Tuesday? Whatever. So the first thing is, since this is kind of like a module, something that's not in the implemented right off the bat, is you want to import it before using it. And then, so I have this variable, and I'm using this command, the date that I just imported in. And what I want to do, what I want to do here is, like I said, I want to know the day, and the arguments here are the year, the month, and then the day, like the day number. So, and just to tell you guys what the range is like, so this year goes from 1 to like 9,999, and then for the month is 1 to 12, and then the day is 1 to 31. And Mondays are 1, and then Sundays are 7. So with this, you would just have the variable, and then you do this command that it's part of this datetime module, and then you get 3. So this is today, and it's a Wednesday, so it's good. And then this next one is, what if you wanted to query like the latest and earliest dates that you could use? And that's how I actually found this. Is so, what if you didn't know like what are the different things you can use, like methods for datetime? What you can do is use this dir and just print it out. Like you have all of this in here that you could use. But for this problem, I just want to do the minimum, and that gives me this. There's the beginning of the year, and then these are the beginning numbers. And then what about the last, which is the maximum? So you have this 9, what I just mentioned, this, and then that. So this is pretty much your range. And then this, it's just a function. Actually, no. What you're gonna do in your in your lab is you're gonna create a function out of this, but this is just an example of like what it may be, how you would use datetime. And what it does essentially is it tells the user the number of days, like the number of Mondays or number of Sundays in a given year and in a given month. So you guys can create that, but this is just me doing this. Is, like I said, like you break it down. What do you need to know the inputs? What do you have the inputs, and what do you need to know the outputs? And then so you have that first here, and then your count is true because I'm doing a while loop. And then this is I'm initializing them, and this is going to become your output, but you always want to initialize it because you're going to iterate it and add to it. And then so you have this while loop for the counting of the days. And then here I even implemented try and except. And then the try and except, it's not just catching your errors. I mean, like an actual error, but in this sense, what I'm trying to do is once you do this and try, and then you're running this while loop if it's true, right? So, and then so this count is true, you're running this, but then once it becomes false, you're done. Then I want to just print, okay, day counting completed. So that's what I'm doing here. And then this next few is just, you know, it's always good to work with numbers, but then once you print it out, I want to work with words. So that's what I'm doing here. And the output is day counting, and then the number of days, Sundays, in this month and this year, and then I think we do have 4 Sundays. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Thank you guys. Let us know if you have any questions.
If there are no questions, I think this is pretty much it for today's coding lab. If there are questions, please let us know.
I have a question.
Yeah, I was just answering.
Perfect.
So do you want me to create a breakout room for you, or is it something generic?
We can do a breakout.
Sure.
Hey, Angela. Yeah, I think do you want to share something? We can probably just do it here.
On my screen?
Yeah. This is only 2 of us.
Oh, really? Wow.
I know, weird. Do you know what happened with the link? Like, it's so small today.
I don't know.
Okay.
Let me share my screen. Okay.
All right.
Where am I? Okay, so like for this.
Oh man, yeah, this is like everyone's getting an issue with this one. Okay.
I was able to get some help from a person from, I guess, from like another office hour on it, but I
Yeah.
feel like I don't really fully understand of like what's going on with this one,
Okay.
especially with these. Because at first I was confused whether or not they were indexes or if it was like a list.
Okay. What it's doing. So I guess for if I'm gonna ask, like, like if I was using this, so you have this my function, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're passing it like this input 1 and input 2.
Yeah.
So input 1, it looks like it's like all of them, it looks like it's a list. So like you're passing it 2 lists. So
Mm-hmm.
so you're pretty much defining, okay, you have this input 1, that one there's 0 to 1, and then input 2 just has 1. So yeah, does that make sense? Or what about that?
Input. Wait. Input. So like, are you referring to? I don't know what you're referring to with the input. So like.
Okay. So like you have input _1 and _2.
Yeah.
And then so that's your arbitrary like arguments, right? Like that's the inputs you have. You're passing it to your function, whatever.
Right.
And then so like once you have this and it's defined, yeah, this function, and you're using it, you just pretty much, it takes like these 2 lists, like input that _1 and that _2 are just 2 lists, and then this whole go ahead, what?
Oh, I was thinking like, it's like, are these both? Or are these like what are they? Are they like an integer? Or
Yeah, oh, I see what you're saying. So like that first one, like that that if statement that you have, uh it it's just pretty much showing, so the length of your first list. So the length of your first list, you're trying to compare if it's greater than 1.
mm-hmm.
So for example, if you have like 2 elements, and then it would be greater than 1. You're gonna go inside this list, yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah, because then if it's only 1, then you only have 1 number. So everything here, I guess I didn't really. So you have this list, right? And then
From the bottom here.
Yeah. So you have a list, and then but then inside your function, you're trying to get the numbers inside. I don't know. Does that make sense? You're trying to get the numbers inside, so that you're trying to compare it.
Get the numbers inside. So you try to.
Yeah, like how that one that you have, like, it says 0, 1, right? It's like a list.
Right here.
Yeah. And then so the first one, like it should output, like, so you have this 0 to 1, and then you have the length of it, and then it's greater than 1, right? The length of that.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So you're gonna run that code inside that, and then so it's gonna check again. Is your input 1 the first number? So this, how you have this a square bracket and then 0?
Yeah.
That's just saying get the 0 from 0 to 1. Like you're getting 0 there. That's the number 0, right?
Yeah.
And then it's saying the number 0, is it 0? That's what it's asking. Is that number 0 0? And if it is, then the answer equals 0.
Oh.
Yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
it's a bunch of like loopy things.
Yeah, it does make sense. Okay. And then So like with each of these, like does it go through like the whole function?
Yeah, it goes to the whole function if it meets the condition.
Hmm.
Yeah, like for example that first one we talked about. Yeah, that one definitely works. And then I don't the second one. The second one I think doesn't, because like it says 2.
Hmm. Oh.
Does
That's,
that yeah, like what is this one like wanting you to do? Like
is this? Oh, it was originally to like debug stuff. I was able to, with a lot of help, I was able to debug,
okay, that's good.
but I was like, but like throughout it, I was like, I don't know what's going on with this.
Oh, but also you did it, but then you know I see. No, it's fine. It's always for me. Yeah, that's not like, especially like when you know how you guys are working with conditionals, like
Yeah.
and then one conditional was good enough, and then you have like multiple ones now. So I guess one thing that really helps is just following, like once you define that function or a variable,
Mhm.
just like you know, by hand or whatever you can, like to follow it is just like every step of your code, like what is it doing, and then what are the variables, like for example input 1, like, you know, or input 2 here, right?
Mhm.
We're trying to manipulate them, right? Like and then, you know, because we're trying to access what's inside them. And then what really helps is like, okay, you have these, and then does it really get inside this loop, or does it get inside the condition? And then, you know, the more you do that, the better.
Man, I wonder. I like to get more practice when it comes to like debugging and like conditionals and stuff.
Yeah, I actually I mean, for me, like I don't really like reading. So like what's really good is if you watch like YouTube videos, there's a lot of if you follow, like, you know, like throughout the day, if you're just, I guess if you're bored, you could watch a YouTube video that there's a lot that shows like how to define some things.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I watched some YouTube videos on things that I've been stuck on sometimes.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll just keep watching them.
Yeah, yeah. It's not gonna take like 1 month, or you know what I mean. Like if you like doing it, for me, I didn't actually like doing like coding, but like when you do it more, and the one thing that really was like pressing was you're trying to do something, right, and it doesn't work. That really, like, I hated that portion, and then I have to, you know, like the one thing, and and you spent like days, maybe weeks, just to like figure out, okay, what am I doing wrong? And that really happened to me with loops. Like loops, I hate with a passion, I guess.
Oh.
Yeah. So because like the loop, like especially, you know, you guys worked with while loops, right? And
Mhm.
and with while loops you can get that infinite loop. So so I try to avoid doing that and then use for loops. But yeah, just like if you watch the YouTube video, this are like, once you watch the YouTube video and then like do it, you know, do it along with them. And then the nice thing about it is like they've already figured it out.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
All right. Well, I guess
I think we're done. I don't know if All right. See you next week.
see you next week.